and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek UK. I'm the Deputy Editor Siobhan Holt. Today we're going to discuss a very important topic. We are speaking to Emily Luscombe, who is a partner at which is a sustainability consulting firm where Emily leads the strategic communications specialism. And in 2022, Emily was diagnosed with cancer, and she has bravely agreed to talk to us today about her experiences. Now, each experience is unique, and we hope that this episode will help to raise understanding of how businesses and colleagues can better support cancer patients and those with wider chronic health illnesses. So thank you for joining us today, Emily. How are you?
I'm good, Siobhan. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you for joining us. So to start, could you please just tell us about your cancer diagnosis?
Sure. And it's funny, isn't it? 3 years ago, it doesn't sound very long, but it feels a bit of a lifetime to me. So kind of reflecting back on January 2022, I found a lump in my breast, which was not expected. I ignored it, as all busy working mums do, for a month or two, and then thought I'd better get this checked out, but genuinely did not expect it to be anything more than a benign bother. So was rather horrified to find out that it was a cancerous tumour, and it was relatively large and one of two. So within a period of a few weeks, we went from living a pretty normal life to having our world turned on its head and everything that comes with what turned out to be 12 months of intensive medical treatment to get me sorted.
And at the time then, how did you initially process that information? And what did you think about the impact on work?
I think I went into autopilot. I was worried for my children. I was worried for my husband. I wasn't ever really worried for myself. And I've heard this from many friends and colleagues who've been through similar diagnoses. I think you can't allow yourself to wallow in what's the worst that could happen to me. So you turn your attention to what you can control, which is trying to keep everything else on track. So yes, there was a kind of an immediate flurry of how we were going to communicate with our young children and how we were going to manage this life change at home. And then quite quickly, I need to have that conversation with my boss and with colleagues, as I needed to hand over work responsibilities and start treatment immediately.
And how did you do that? How did you inform your managers and other colleagues as well?
It was an unusual situation for me, and every organisation is different. But because I was on the executive leadership team of the consultancy I worked at the time, my kind of chief exec and my head of HR were peers who I was in touch with daily. So it didn't feel like a kind of difficult formal process I needed to go through to report the situation. I spoke to HR and then said I wanted to talk directly to the chief exec. I told him I had some bad news and I'd need to take some time off. I had an absolutely wonderful chief exec at the time. It was Ed Amery, who was the then chief executive of Instinctive Partners. He took me out for lunch and he said, "Emily, what do you need from us? What do you want to do with regards to work? And if you don't know, that's fine. But once you have decided how you want to work and how you need us to support you, tell me and we will make it happen." And even to this day, I feel incredibly fortunate that I was able to have that conversation. The reality is you just don't know in that kind of initial days and weeks. A cancer diagnosis doesn't come in one fell swoop. They tell you initially, yes, we found this and this is what we think, but then you have to go through a few days and sometimes weeks of further tests to understand how far it's spread, what the treatment pathway is going to be. And in my case, there were some concerns that it was even more serious than it turned out to be. So initially, I didn't really know what control I would have over my capacity to work or how and when I would want to engage with the business. So the reassurance that my job was still there was very quick reassurance that I didn't need to worry about being paid, that this would continue, until we came to a moment when we might need to review it. And in my event, we didn't. And so those initial worries of, oh my goodness, am I going to be able to pay the mortgage? Will I still have a job? That was kind of the initial fear, and that was parked quite quickly. However, this came just a couple of months after I'd had quite a significant promotion at work, and I love my career. I've always been very passionate about my profession, and so I was absolutely incensed that this cancer would come along and disrupt things in the way it did. And I remember that sense of kind of indignation, that how dare it come along and try and disrupt things. And I think in a way that anger at this inanimate object enabled to kind of propel me forward through that treatment, the sense that I would not be beaten by it. And therefore, when I did get clarity on treatment pathways, I was able to make the decision that I would continue to work as best I could. And Instinctive Partners were fantastic in supporting me through that.
And looking back on that now, do you think that was the right decision?
For me, 100%. I'm an extrovert and I take energy from people around me. And when you are in that dark place of medical treatment and so much unknown, because if you've never come into contact with cancer or cancer treatment through loved ones, there are so many questions and specialist areas that you fortunately never had to know anything about. So kind of when you're in that dark place and you're trying to take all this on board, for me, the more normal the rest of my life could remain, the better. And working for me is a really big part of who I am and where I get my energy from. So yes, for me it was. That said, I quickly realised, because I went into chemotherapy very quickly, and that was 4 to 5 months of treatment, and pretty intensive treatment, as anyone who's been through chemo will know. There were certain things that I just couldn't do. I couldn't remain in a client-facing role because I could not be sure of when I would be available to my teams and to my clients. And I recognised that kind of lack of clarity would be really difficult for people as well as difficult for myself. So perhaps some of the more stressful or unpredictable elements of my job, we handed over to colleagues. But I was able to continue adding value in my role as a leader in the business. I continued to have an active role on the executive. I ran a lot of our international training programs around client services, and that remained. And then I supported colleagues on new business and other areas where I could perhaps dip in and out as needed, or be very present for 1 week and then absent for the following week, as that was how my chemo treatment happened.
So what advice then would you give someone who's just maybe received a cancer diagnosis using those sort of bases? What would your top tips be?
I'm always nervous to give tips because everybody is different and every individual is different and has a different relationship with their work. Look, I'll give you an example. I met some wonderful women going through similar treatment to me at similar stage of life while I was having the treatment. And a couple of those who work actually for big public sector organisations, one ironically for the NHS, had a very, very different professional experience to mine. And she was essentially told by her HR team, you have cancer, you're sick, you're having treatment, you must go away and get better and then come back to work. Don't worry about work. It's well meant, but as an employer, that is 100% the wrong thing to say. Give people the choice. Maybe some people do want to go away and disappear and not think about work for a year, and absolutely that's understandable. But this woman actually wanted to continue working, contributing and having that sense of adding value, that I needed to get from my job. And several times she appealed this and said, please, can I continue to work? Please, can I? And it was a flat no. You're not well. We cannot, I think, even from a kind of legal or risk perspective, we cannot have you working for our business at this time. And that, in my view, is absolutely the wrong thing. So for each individual and each organisation they are in, there are different, I guess, rules of engagement. But my advice to anybody going through this is, when you're having that conversation, don't be forced to commit to how you want to work right at the beginning, because you really won't know and things will change. Any commitment you make must be possible to be revised as you go through your treatment, and there will be times when you can work perhaps and times when you can't. But also I would say, please don't feel pressured into giving everything up if that's not right for you. And if certainly within our public relations industry, if you're working in consultancy, and the opportunity to perhaps take a non-client facing role for a while so that you can maintain some value add with perhaps less of the stress or the intensity, that is an ideal solution in my view.
Excellent. And so my next question is then, were you concerned about your career trajectory and financial support?
Yes, absolutely. One of your first concerns on getting any sort of medical diagnosis that you feel is going to kind of remain as a factor in your life for a period to come is, will I still be able to work? Can I still hold down my job? I'm the main breadwinner in our family. And yes, of course, there are concerns about paying the mortgage. But I was very fortunate at the time that my boss very quickly assured me that I didn't need to worry about that. So I count my blessings there. I think mid to long term, one of my greatest anxieties through that year of treatment was, would I feel up to returning to do the job that I love and that I knew I used to be very good at? And this kind of sense of indignation that, maybe wouldn't ever get back to that level of energy that is required to be in consultancy in London. We know it's exhausting, but it's an exhilarating job, and certainly exhilaration felt quite a long way from my way of operating in that year. And then certainly as I started to reach the end of treatment, there was a bit of that sense of returning back to work after a year on maternity leave, which I wrote a blog for you guys, Siobhan, at the time saying this is not like returning from maternity leave, because for me it certainly wasn't. After maternity leave, you've had this wonderful year with a new baby and had some massive achievements, and it kind of felt that I'd just been treading water for a year trying to survive, quite literally. But that sense of having been out of the swim of things for a year, and will my brain be able to catch up? Will I remember how to do quite simple tasks? Will I know how to lead? Will I know how to advise clients? Yes, I had great fear of that, and it probably took a few weeks to adjust going back. But because I took the right amount of time, and because I hadn't been entirely disconnected from the business, on reflection, it took less time than I feared it might.
And were you quite honest with clients about what you were going through at the time, or
Yes.
did you avoid that?
Yeah, I was. As part of this sense that I would not allow this to be a wasted year. This is just very kind of me, and many people would think this was quite a strange way of working, I'm sure. But for myself, I wanted to get something out of that year off, which wasn't just getting myself treated. So I made the decision quite early on that I would write a blog. And I spoke to John Harrington, and we had some similar kind of shared experiences, and I said, look, I've had this idea. I think maybe some of my experience as a leader in a public relations consultancy could be used by other consultancies, because many of my senior colleagues had come to me and said, we don't know how to behave. We don't have a cancer policy. We don't know what's okay, what's not okay. We don't know what to ask you to do or not do. And I'd said to them, well, okay, well, let's use this. I'm on the other side of the fence now. Let's use my experience to help us shape the right approach for the future. Because very fortunately, I think there probably will be future cases. We're seeing more and more of cancer diagnoses in the younger working population, aren't we? So I was already doing that with my employer. And then I thought, well, okay, how can I take some of these learnings and also put the lens of communication across it, my other great passion, and turn this into a blog series? And I remember talking to John about this and agreeing that we would take this opportunity to report, I guess, on my learnings and experiences of that year in the hope that we could put something back. That was my coping mechanism, being very open about it. Therefore, my experiences were being reported through PRWeek throughout that year. And so there was kind of no sense that I didn't want people to know. I certainly never felt ashamed, which is fortunate for me. Not all others feel the same there, but I felt quite confident. And actually, in a way, I wanted clients to know that's where I'd gone. I didn't want there to be any sort of stigma or suspicion. Where's Emily gone? Something happened at work. I felt that, it's absolutely okay to say I've got cancer, I can't work, and you will be understood. And I was. My clients were absolutely wonderful. I had clients sending me cards and flowers, and some clients said, look, let's meet up for coffee, every couple of months, so you still feel part of our business, not just your own business. Let's just meet up as friends. And I did, and that was absolutely wonderful for somebody to give that level of thought to keeping me in the loop in a non-stressful way. So yes, for me, my clients absolutely got me through.
And then how did you handle the sort of the physical aspects? Because as you mentioned there, chemotherapy, but also surgery. How did you handle that?
I think cancer treatment has got a really bad reputation, with good reason. And I had expected the chemo to be the worst phase. My recollection, my memory of chemo is not the same as my husband's memory of my chemo. He tells me it was every bit as awful as we thought it would be, but that isn't my memory now. My memory of the worst phase of treatment was the surgery, which was, for me, horrific, and the recovery was very, very slow. And so there was a period of time after I had surgery where I absolutely couldn't work. And then as soon as I was strong enough, I then went into radiotherapy. So there were probably 8 to 12 weeks of the year when I entirely disconnected from work. And that was the hardest phase for me, because it was just about survival and continuing this treatment. Again, that kind of physical strength, you lose a lot of your energy levels, you lose your fitness. And I've always been quite keen to keep myself fit, and thought physical fit and mental fit go hand in hand. So probably that return to work in January 2023 was made all the harder by the fact that I was no longer physically fit, and that getting your fitness back after that sort of treatment and surgery does take a long time, but you get there.
You mentioned there your husband, but also colleagues and managers at the time. So I was just wondering, what did you learn about the importance of having a strong support network? And who did you turn to for advice and support?
My network absolutely came through for me that year. And when I say that, I mean my professional network. Of course, friends and family were absolutely wonderful, and my children's school and all those who you would expect to support you. I think I had underestimated the power of a professional network. And this isn't an advert for LinkedIn, I don't know what it is. But once my blogs went out there and people started hearing about this and talking about this, was contacted by so many ex-colleagues, contacts of colleagues, people I'd never talked to before who just knew of me within the industry, people who'd been through treatment and were offering advice and support. And then as the year progressed, others who reached out to me and said, I've just been diagnosed, or my wife's just been diagnosed, could we have a chat? And that continues to this day. So only a couple of months ago, a professional contact who I worked with probably 15 years ago reached out to me and said, I've just had this diagnosis. I've made the decision I want to talk publicly about it because you so inspired me when you were having your treatment. And I think this is such a good thing to do. And I was proud, but also the fact that that decision I took at the time, which was largely self-interested, it was a good mental kind of self-management, self-propulsion, writing that blog through that year, that continues to help people today is just brilliant privilege.
And what was the most important lesson you learned about prioritising your energy and resources during treatment? Because as you say, it was a really difficult time.
Yeah, it was. Not to lose sight of what's important, which at the end of the day is keeping yourself going and being kind to yourself, taking the time and accepting that you're not your usual self, and that's okay. I think that kind of the biggest critic of my professional contribution that year was me by a long chalk. And it took a few months for me to just accept that actually I was doing pretty well to keep going, and I didn't need to apologize for not being the Emily that would usually show up. I found new ways to give myself energy. So I was very fortunate early on to come across a wonderful charity called Maggie's, which is run out of the Royal Marsden and many of the big NHS trusts. And Maggie's organise walks and meetings and events for cancer patients, largely women, but not universally women. And early on, I forced myself to go to one of these sessions, and I really, couldn't have felt less like networking, and thought this is like my job, but the difficult part of my job, but significantly worse, because I'll be meeting all these people who look and feel even sicker than I do. Actually, I met this group of incredibly inspiring women who were all at different stages of treatment, who gave me that strength to keep moving forward, who answered lots of questions I had that I hadn't found the right way to ask. And I met them and went walking every other week throughout that year of treatment on the heath around the Royal Marsden. And there were 20 to 30 of us. A couple of them I'm still in touch with and meet up with regularly. And that different type of networking, and what a strange networking situation to find yourself in, so different to anything I'd done before. But that was what gave me the energy to beat this thing. So that socialization to help your mental health while you're going through such physical challenges and physical healing, for me, that was a really important part of that.
You mentioned there the people that supported you, but I'm just wondering, not to name any names, but were there any questions that maybe arose that, from a myth-busting point of view, that maybe people should avoid?
Yeah. Do you know what? Not avoid. So my biggest observation was right at the beginning, people didn't know what to say. And we've all been there, haven't we? When we've had a colleague, it's not a close friend, so maybe you don't feel that kind of close or kind of private connection to them, but what's going on is so obvious, and certainly in the case of breast cancer treatment, so visible because you lose your hair so quickly. When we're working in a virtual world and everything is on Teams, it's very apparent that the person you're speaking to is not well. Early on, some colleagues came to me and said, we don't know what to say, but we think we should say something. And I was so incredibly relieved at that moment to realise that one of the big challenges was that people are afraid to say anything, to say the wrong thing. And so one of my very first blogs for you guys was just say something. Say you don't know what to say. That's okay, but don't ignore it, because somebody's going through this incredible, horrific, life-altering, forever life-changing experience. And to feel that that's ignored, or that people are afraid to talk about it, for me was awful. So, my first piece of advice is ask people how they are, ask them if they want you to talk to them about it, and they may say no, and that's great. Or say, I don't know what to say, but I just know I'm thinking of you. That's all that's needed.
Absolutely. So you've explained there that you faced a challenge that was both physically and mentally demanding. What frameworks or daily practices did you use to maintain as positive an outlook as you could and to continue moving forward?
So I'm a planner. Anyone who's worked with me will smile at that. The treatment regime that I faced was intense and planned to within the 5 minute window. You must take this medication at this time, you must turn up at this time to have this blood check done, and then this treatment. And so actually that forensic planning through that year carried me through. And the most difficult time came right towards the end of the year when the consultant said, okay, Emily, you've been through chemotherapy, you've been through radiotherapy, you've had the surgery, now you've got to take these pills every day. You are, from all we can see now cancer free. They don't ever give you a clean bill of health because they want you to come back and be checked, and there's all these warnings of chance of recurrence, and it never really ends. But at that moment, you're kind of released into the world, and they say, right, come and see us in 3 months, off you go. And that sense that nobody else was planning for me anymore, that I had to now get back in control of my own life, that was petrifying. So from a kind of mental health perspective, I think it's the point at which the control is taken off you and you are just left to your own devices to pick up your life where you left off. That is possibly the part that employers may not think of. You know, everybody's congratulating you, you're at end of a treatment, brilliant, you can get back to normal. And actually you've become a bit institutionalized. I never felt afraid of dying when I was in hospital being treated. All my focus was on, I'm here and I am responding to the medication. And if I keep doing this thing that all these incredible experts who know all about this stuff tell me to do, it's all going to be great. And then at the end of it, the thought that nobody is checking your bloods every couple of days and nobody is pumping all this medication into your body, that's really frightening. And that's possibly the point at which the wraparound care from your employer really needs to focus.
And with that then, what advice would you give to a business owner with an employee going through a similar situation? Do you have other recommendations?
Yes, so there are some incredible organisations, not-for-profit organisations, who provide guidance for employers on how to create a health policy for cancer treatment or for chronic health conditions, how to reintroduce colleagues to the workforce. They provide talking guides, they provide toolkits, they provide advice on mentoring or talking therapy, all those sorts of things. I know that Cancer Research UK and Macmillan provide these fantastic free resources. And then there's a wonderful smaller organisation called Working with Cancer, and they do the same. So the starting point for any HR or kind of business owner, I would say, is look there. From my personal experience, you know, I was very fortunate that my company provided private health insurance, so I could have my medical treatment slightly faster than some friends who were treated through the NHS. Very similar level of care, I have to say, but slightly more flexible, and everything happens slightly more quickly. But that same health policy also provided therapy and kind of ongoing support after the medical treatment finished. And I did take up some of that for some months in kind of reintroducing back into the workplace, which really helped me. So having that available, I think, for colleagues and being pointed to it and urged to take time to invest in that, not throw myself back into work immediately. And that was another point. I did do a phased return that was suggested by HR. Initially, I thought, well, you know, I won't possibly need that. But as the time drew closer, I absolutely did.
What was the phased return? How many days back in the office was it?
At my choice, I went back 3 days a week at the beginning. I felt I probably wouldn't give myself enough of a chance to really get back in doing my job and making an impact on less than that. And I did 3 days maybe for the first month, then I went up to 4 days. And I was actually at that point still working a 4-day week because my youngest son was still very small. So for me, having that kind of flexibility and did more at home working, I count myself lucky that I got cancer in the post-COVID world where virtual working is so easy and accessible. So not having to do the commute more than once or twice a week really helped with my energy levels. Those sorts of flexible parameters work well for me.
And similarly then, what advice would you give for other work colleagues? How can they offer support?
At a really basic level, I think one of my observations is just be human. Don't look at a colleague and think, oh, they're my boss or they're my junior, or, you know, therefore I can't just talk to them as a human being. Sickness is the great leveler. This affects all of us, and it kind of all brings us back to the same point where we just need support around us. So just be present and show up. And as I said earlier, ask people how they want to be engaged with, how they want to work, and what's okay. I'd have colleagues WhatsApping me saying, we've got this briefing and it's so up your street. Would you like to have a chat about it? And I know a couple of times I went back and said, I'm sorry, no. And I was heartbroken to say no, but I love that they were still thinking of me. And I know they didn't mind, and there were other people who could do it. But the fact that they were thinking of me, that really mattered. And then I had other colleagues who just did really small but regular acts of kindness. One lady who sent me some headscarves from a company she'd found when her mum was having treatment. And that was so kind, just to turn up to my house with this package. And others who wrote me cards. People who took time not just to send a WhatsApp or a text, but actually to do something that made me feel that I was kind of missed. And then being invited to things like the work summer party and the Christmas social. Of course, I didn't go to them because I couldn't, but I was still invited. I wasn't forgotten just because I wasn't on my work emails. That was actually really important for people to take time to remember and invite me to things through my personal email or my mobile. That was really welcome.
Do you think there can be a bit of a feeling sometimes that when you're coming back, unfortunately, maybe that the business might have moved on without you a little bit? Is there that fear, do you think, when some people are coming back?
Absolutely. I was petrified of it. Of course. My career is so important to me. I was absolutely furious that this cancer was putting blockers in the road for my, progression. Honestly, it didn't. If anything, it changed my perspective on my career and actually propelled me to take a new career step a year or so after returning from treatment. So no, actually, I think possibly my experiences through 2022 moved me forward. But in the short term, yes, there is that great insecurity which comes from just not being in the conversation. And the reality is when you go back, we had some new business briefs out when I went off in 2022 and they were still on the table in 2023 because client decision making has got so slow. So, once you're back in the swing of things, again, that is similar to maternity leave. You realise that if you are valued by the business, you will be valued again as soon as you're back.
And then in your view, how can the PR industry as a whole better support cancer patients or those possibly caring for someone going through treatment?
We are a brilliantly networked industry. We should be, right? Because we're communicators and we know how to build relationships and sustain those relationships. So leaning into our ability to network, I think, is a superpower we have that we can take and share. There are networks within the industry that have been set up by those going through different kind of life events. Some of those I've been part of at different times. So I think sharing information like we're doing today, not being afraid to use our greatest powers of communication to share learnings and perhaps make our industry just feel a little bit smaller and a bit kinder. That's one of the most valuable things we can do. And then signposting to information. There's such a lot out there. And those early days and weeks of trying to grapple with all this medical information that's being thrown at you by the doctors and you're having to make decisions really fast. That's scary. And I wish I'd known then what I know now. So I say this all the time. If anybody is going through this and they just want advice, reach out. I'm always happy to talk about this, and my experience is just mine, and I cannot speak for whether what I went through would be the same for anybody else, but I'm always happy to share, and many people I've met I know feel the same. So just knowing who to talk to get information to make those early days and weeks easier, that's something great that we can do for one another.
And also we focus there on cancer specifically, but do you think that a lot of what you're saying in a wider capacity can help staff facing chronic health conditions?
Yes, absolutely, I do. And, a lot of the public speaking I've done about this is about chronic health impacts, not cancer specifically. Again, I've been, approached by colleagues and contacts who are going through all sorts of different life events, medical events, and a lot of the kind of principles of how businesses should engage and what's okay to ask for and how to approach flexible working. This applies, I think, whatever the situation you're in.
So how then would you say has your diagnosis changed the way you approach work today?
So some of those ladies I walk round the heath with said on those walks, when I am better, I am quitting my job. I'm taking my family and we're going to go and live in Australia because I've always wanted to. And there's that real sense of I've been given another shot at life, so I need to do something that's going to change everything for me. And I always kept quiet at that time because it felt that most people were in that camp. And I was not. I was the one wanting to get back to work and still working. And some of those friends on those walks said, "You're mad," but I love my job. So I count myself as very, very lucky in that respect. So cancer treatment did not make me deprioritize my career. It made me value my career more. However, it did make me reflect more, I think, on career development and on what more I wanted to take from my career. So in the end, I went back to work and, I got my feet back under the table. And then some months on, I made the decision that I needed a career change, that my life had changed forever. My appearance had changed forever. I'd found a new haircut that I actually quite like, and I've kept it short. And I kind of felt I needed a new career start as well. And by the same token, I wanted to apply my communication skills to something that felt perhaps a bit more purposeful and meaningful. Now, my youngest son is autistic and he has climate anxiety. And through that year, he would talk to me quite a lot about climate change and global warming and his fears for the future of the planet. And then, by fortune, our contact through my network connected me to ERM, who presented me with this opportunity to combine communication and consultancy with sustainability. So it's a dream match for me, and this has been the most incredible career opportunity. And perhaps I wouldn't have been brave enough to take that step or been in the mindset to take that if I hadn't been through the events of 2022.
Well, that's great to hear that you found that passion. Thank you, Emily, for your honesty on such a personal issue. We really appreciate it. And I know lots of people are going to get so much out of this podcast. If you or someone you care about has been diagnosed with cancer, then many of the leading cancer charities offer support and advice online, which is free to access. And that's all we have time for this week. Thanks again, Emily. Thank you to you for listening. And until next time, goodbye.